Thank you for tuning in to Exeter TV. The meeting will be starting shortly. While we wait, let's learn more about Exeter TV. Exeter TV is the town's public and government access channels, available on Comcast channels 98 and 22. Channel 98 is your channel. If you have an idea for a program, want to host your own talk show, or submit a film, we're here to get your content on television. On Channel 22, we bring you live and replay coverage of government meetings and other town updates. A third channel, Blue Hawk Media, is operated by SAU 16 and can be found on Channel 13, with all your school sports, events, and meetings. You can watch Exeter TV online at exeternh.tv, Apple TV, and on Roku. Find us on social media for extra content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell to get notified about live streams and new content. Tune in to our platforms every other Friday to watch the Exeter Bi-Weekly Report with recaps of recent events, updates from town departments, and messages from nonprofits in your area. If you head to our website, exeternh.tv, we invite you to sign up to our newsletter to receive monthly updates about new content, upcoming meetings, and more. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch Exeter TV and hope that you tune in to our other content as well.
Good evening. And this is an add-on meeting. It's October 13th, 2021. It's an add-on meeting for the BRC's normal schedule, dedicated specifically to sort of looking at the capital improvements program, the CIP program, seeing what we have in front of us, and discuss sort of what the approach we want to take, not only this year, but over the next several years, as there are, as you can see, a number of projects and obligations, so to speak, that we are being asked to consider. We're not going to talk about anything specific projects tonight, except as maybe they relate to an overall amount of money that we're looking to spend. And last year, sort of after the last 2 years of CIP analysis, where there was somewhat of an, it was pick one project or another, which I think all felt a little uncomfortable with. They were both very good projects. And we just felt that it might be worthwhile taking a broader look at the CIP program as opposed to just on a year-to-year basis. A lot of times we sort of get a project put in front of us literally within a day or so of us being asked to review it. And just felt it might be worthwhile to just sort of talk about the various things that are in front of us, see if there are any questions by committee members. We have Russ and Melissa here to talk about sort of programming from the town's perspective. So I thought it would be a nice way to ease into this as opposed to waiting until November when we're all sort of frazzled and sometimes discussion goes by the wayside in the interest of brevity. So, Corey and I had, sort of taken the last several pages, the last tab in our CIP book, the financials, and wanted to summarize those into a table so that you can, it's sort of difficult flipping back and forth to get a full idea of how this impacts individual families. But, just to summarize that table, the green is the, let's say, the general fund projects made up of, debt service and big projects, bond issues and warrant articles. There's also leases and then non-debt obligations or requests, like fixing the Rains barn or something, some of the funds that we have, the conservation fund and the snow fund and master planning projects and things like that, we just pay out of cash flow. Then under that were the proposed projects, and that's, again, a summary of the sheet on page 104, in 103 on the CIP book in the back and the financials. And so that's basically, that page is the existing and the proposed, and what we've done is sort of show not only this year, but also the consolidation of all of them into the 5-year program. Blue is for water, and the yellow is for the sewer fund. And what we wanted to show here was, just to sort of go through this. And if you go back and forth, if you haven't already, the numbers in here are basically summaries of all of the various projects. So for instance, on page 103, in FY22, all of the general fund current debt service is $1,385,502. And you'll see that in the upper line on FY22, $1,385,502. So it's basically the summary of all the projects, not the individual projects. The upshot of this that is sort of, let's say, and then what we did is boiled it down to what the average impact is to a $300,000 house. And where this comes from, talking with the folks in the billing department and the assessors department, the actual average home in Exeter these days, single-family home, is a little over $400,000 average. But when you add in condos and mobile home parks, that's where the $300,000 comes. Obviously, that's, in today's market, that's probably a little light. But at least it gives you a starting place. It's a nice medium calculator. So, basically what we pay, let's say in 2021, $292 per, for a $300,000, that's the tax impact. If you're in a $300,000 house, that's what you pay now just for projects, not for the budgets, not for schools, anything. That's just what you pay for projects. Then if you go down to the second, the proposed and the total over to the right-hand side, well, now that number is $572. So it's gone up by almost double. That's the actual additional. So then it would actually triple. Your actual tax obligations due to just projects will go from $292 to an added $572. Same thing with water. What we pay now is about $278 for an average usage of 48,000 gallons a year, which is 12,000 gallons a quarter. Again, that's just based on the math, the average household on town services. We pay now $278 on an annual basis for projects, and then you'll be adding another $222. So a little less than doubling just due to the water obligations. And then on sewer, right now we're at $678 in it's $610 in FY21. What we are currently paying for projects on the sewer, obviously the big nut on that is the new treatment plant. That will go up by $458 on the lower right-hand side. So the red is the summary. So in FY21, if you go down to the red, we are now paying $1,141. If you're on town services, that's what you're paying on an annual basis if you live in an average $300,000 house and use on the average of 48,000 gallons a year, which again are our averages. So that's what you're paying for projects, and that will effectively double in the next 5 years. You'll add $1,251 onto that 1141, so to be about $2,300 to $2,400 from the current $1,100. That's water, sewer, and general fund, all of your obligations as a town resident on town services.
And just for the listeners at home, if I may interject, Bob,
Sure.
This spreadsheet assumes approval for a DPW garage and a public safety complex in your projections.
Yeah, it's everything that's proposed in the CIP book. So if you go through all the sheets up front of all the vehicle requests by the departments and the project requests. What this also shows, if you look at the, again, using the table on 103, the public safety facility is a TBD. We don't know what it is yet. We've just, approved monies last year, to do an analysis and sort of a facilities review on what that might, so that's several years down the road. But what Corey and I wanted to do was get a sort of an idea of just where we are budget-wise. Again, looking at the DPW facility garage, that was also a TBD. So we wanted to be able to throw just some general numbers in there to see what that might look like. And to see if we're comfortable with it.
I just wanted to say it out loud because there are going to be people watching.
It's a budget committee
that don't see the spreadsheet.
It's incumbent upon us to, on an annual basis, to come up with a reasonable budget, including reasonable projects to add to the quality of life in this town, without breaking the bank, so to speak. That's our obligation. And to make those recommendations to the board. We work, integrally with the finance department, with the town manager, and we come up with that. So we just felt that this is hard to do on a year-by-year basis. We just wanted to take a 5-year look at this, just to see where we are.
So
Any questions?
I just want to clarify to make sure. I'm going to say it aloud, viewers at home, myself, all that. So this green bar at the very top, current obligations, right now 2021, for average 300,000 home, is $292.
Correct. For just projects.
For just the projects that are currently.
And leases
already-
and that kind of thing,
Yep.
yes.
And so in 2027, those same projects that are currently being funded for a $300,000 house would be $107. So that
Correct.
decreases in 5 years. because
Significantly.
That's how
Paying
it works.
things off.
Yep.
Due to, well, primarily, due to a couple of things. One is retiring of debt, but also a lot of the leases that we currently have are short-term leases. So
Right.
those, 5 years from now will be gone.
Right.
Of course, if you look at vehicle leases, there are some significant ones being added. But yes,
Yeah.
current leases
Right.
will dwindle down to a very small amount in 5 years.
Right.
Correct.
Thank you. So each of these then goes, the second green bar, which I know folks can't see at home, but the second green bar would be funding everything right now, approving all of this would lead to $572 in 2027.
Plus
So-
407.
Plus what we already have, right, but I think the way I was hearing you earlier, Bob, it sounded like the comparison to now and then 2021 fund, how much we're spending right now, for example, I heard the 2027 dollars, but there are some changes because things do decrease by 2027 from what we're currently
Yeah,
spending.
if we
So
did
just wanted
nothing-
to clarify that
Yeah, if we did nothing, we're cutting our
572
obligations by 2/3.
Right, but 572 added in 2027 goes to the, it's not a fair comparison to say $292 today because we're not comparing the current year to 2027. So just
Sure.
wanting to clear up for folks that what our obligations will be in 5 years will decrease currently as we talk about plans for the next 5 years as well. So I was hearing it and I just wanted to say it
So
out loud
our
as well.
Our current obligations for 2021 are $292. Our current obligations, the same obligations in 2027 will be $107.
Right.
And then if everything in the CIP is approved, hypothetically, that adds an additional $572 to $107.
Yes, exactly.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the good news is, and this is, as much catch-up for the committee, Russ eats and breathes this stuff over his, tenure here and the finance department as well. But what I wanted to do is sort of boil it down for the committee so that we can sort of see those, in black and white and green, blue, and yellow, what that actual impact is and not have to be flipping back and forth between a dozen pages. So yes, our current obligations do dwindle. You can even see on the sewer end of things, debt service projects go down by almost $500,000, on our debt service, again, primarily due to the treatment plant. Did you have a question, Judy? Sorry. And there are obviously a number of projects that have been discussed recently that are all sort of competing for the same pocketbook. That being the public safety complex, a public works garage, various iterations of a recreation park, and then a lot of leases. If you look at the lease item, the proposed leases for the town as well as for the utilities, there's several $1 million worth of leases that we're going to be looking at over the next several years. So they're not insignificant numbers. So really what I wanted to do is have an open discussion about how comfortable are we with the sort of the direction that we've been going in, and then where we foresee in 4 to 5 years, which is when the real spending starts, the direction we're going in. Because I think this is it's germane. There are people looking at these facilities. There are department heads considering when to bring them forward. Russ, I think would like to work with us, at least get our opinion. He's got his own ideas on where all of these shuffle into the system. So I want us to be up to speed on that. So that was sort of the genesis of putting this together.
One of the things, if I could just weigh in, just on page 2 of the budget narrative, it talks about our share of the tax rate, and I think that that's important to understand. In 2016, our tax rate, the town share of the tax rate was $709 per thousand, and in 2020 was $591 per thousand. And we've actually reduced our amount as a percentage of the total rate from 27 down to 24. So even though we're talking about significant numbers, they're not insignificant, it's important to understand sort of the basic budget strategy behind what we've been trying to do for the past several years. And I think I will stand up and say that I think it's been a good strategy. I think
Would
it's
agree.
worked well. And every year we seem to be decreasing as a percent of the total. So I'm not saying that decrease is always going to be there, but it's certainly been there as a trend for the past several years. So I just wanted to point that out.
Good.
Yes, may I?
You sure?
Yeah, I was looking at those tables as well, Russ, and in trying to get ready for this meeting, and stating the obvious, but maybe for some people at home not, I was just struck by the different tax rates for comparable towns, right, that one on the bottom of page 3. And the thing I came away with, which I think ties in with it a little bit, is the tax rate, of course, is, we all know this, but maybe some people around town don't know it. The tax rate is very dependent on how much taxable property you have in the town. And so you get towns with similar sizes or similar populations, but have much higher taxable property, and that makes their tax rate lower. So that's a hard thing to relate to people, but I just wanted to sort of state the obvious on that we're struggling to provide services.
Yeah, and I've said many
that are comparable to other towns, but where other comparable towns have more commercial property, let's say, or just more taxable property.
Right.
We know that, but I just wanted to say it out loud. And it was just really made clear by that table on the bottom of page 3, I think, right?
Judy?
There are two large unknowns that I keep in mind here. One large unknown is what the impact of climate change will have on our budget. Water and sewer, as well as larger town projects. The second unknown is what's going to happen in Congress. Will there be an infrastructure bill that will help us with some of these major projects?
Yeah.
One of the X factors that we did not put in here is there are some facilities issues, to your point. The town is growing, but not, appreciably so. So that our water supply facilities are in pretty good shape. And we have the surface water plant on Portsmouth Ave, the groundwater plant on Larry Lane. But, Public Works is making plans to expand the facilities in the next probably 10 years, maybe not 5 years, in order to take us to the next 50 years. We have funded as a committee, or recommended funding, a groundwater development and surface water development program over the last 3 years, and that is ongoing. So at some point, that's going to get to the point where there'll be a facility or something major suggested, which, to your point, might need to be a little bit bigger than what we thought it would be 10 years ago, because of the level of the river or groundwater levels and regulations and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's not even in here. The utilities are always an X factor. Another reason why we brought this to your attention is that, we've put in some placeholders for the public safety complex, which is reasonable. It's not an insignificant number, but it passes the sniff test. There's a reasonable number in there for a public works garage, and there's some of the rec projects baked in there, which will take on a life of their own. But what's not in there is public works projects. As you know, we approved $1.6 million a couple of years ago to upgrade the siphons under the Squamscott River, and almost within a year, we had to go hunting for another $600,000 because the problem was a lot worse than we thought. So public works projects are always an X factor, and again, just sort of, I wanted everybody to be thinking that if something bad comes down the road to the tune of several $1 million, how does that affect what we want to do as a quality of life issue in town? And, do we draw a line somewhere? Tom, did you have,
Yeah.
Chris has been patient. Somewhat.
No, she's vice chair.
I thought you said Chris is impatient. I'm just like,
Somewhat.
duh. So one thing, I had one comment, another one just popped in my head. So as far as federal government and possible funding, that's great, but can't count on it. So I think our decisions need to be made based on we don't have it. So if we don't have it. So I wouldn't go, well, we'll probably get, some money from the federal government. Second thing is whenever we talk about tax rate, Tom brought up a point about commercial, tax base and how much commercial do you have, which is definitely a factor. But there's multiple factors. Because you'll look at, like, you say, well, how come, Bedford's rate is lower than ours? And then you think, well, how come Rye is the classic example. How come their rate's so low? And how come Somersworth, where I used to work years ago, is so high? And one of the things is, too, is it's the value of the buildings itself. So Rye, the homes are very, very expensive. Therefore, their tax rate is lower. We have a disproportionate number of manufactured homes, mobile homes, whatever you want to call it. So that affects, it's about balance. So it affects the tax rate. So, and the third thing is that when commercial tax base, our three largest entities or three largest employers are all nonprofits. So they pay a pilot. So we've got it's a very, it's not a simple solution. It's not a simple way that you can just go, well, we just need this, or, oh, we just need more commercial and then we'll be fine, or, oh, we just need that and we'll be fine. Because I love the nonprofits that we have in our town. I think they're awesome, and they really add to what makes us special. So it's not a matter of, oh, I wish we didn't have them, because I'm grateful, very grateful for them. So, and again, like I said, and I also love the fact that we have such a varied residential base too, but it has its, it has its impact as well. So just make sure everybody just knows that.
John?
Anybody else first? No?
No.
I wanted to actually dovetail on the comments made by Judy and also by you, Christine, regarding particularly potential expensive water and sewer projects that we have to deliberate relative to what you said, the potential that there will be legislation for infrastructure, right? And we don't know what's going to come of that. So this question's for you, Russ. It's somewhat similar to the, ARPA thing, which I'm just starting to wrap my head around, which is this. As we are looking at these expensive things that we kind of know we're going to need at some point, is there a mechanism by which we can plan for these things, and if we're forced into a vote, let's say, let me just say hypothetically, some kind of an upgrade to the water system, a new well, et cetera, that, is an expensive thing, requires a bond, is there a mechanism by which we can approve such a project contingent upon receipt of matching funds, TBD, to at least move that ball forward? I guess maybe that's just a pie in the sky scheme, but I'm just trying to figure out a way to move the ball forward in the hopes that such a infrastructure bill does pass, so that if we don't move the ball forward, then we're a year behind given the structure of our financing and the way we do things. So can someone answer that for me?
Sure. Several years ago, we wrote an article for $4 million contingent upon the ARA program.
Yeah.
So it's possible that you can do it. I think it's just a matter of weighing out whether it makes sense. Because I always look at things, if you bring it to the voters, you're actually looking for an affirmative vote on something. And I think we need to have a pretty good story to tell about what kind of funding might be available. But you could do that. I think you could word such an article to make it contingent upon, typically our bond articles are worded in such a way that they authorize the select board to accept any grants that are out there, and actually the board already has authority. Back in 1994, town meeting gave the select board authority to accept any and all grants. So they have sort of a blanket authority, and we double up on that in the warrant articles when we do bond articles. So I think the answer to your question is yes, but I send the caveat with it that it's really an important exercise to go through how realistic any sort of grant might be before we go talk to the town about a project.
Yeah.
So they can accept grants and other outside funding. The board can.
Christine, well, I just wanted, before I get to you, Nancy, Christine brought a good point that is sort of the reason why we're doing this, is that what we're talking about here is the average impact. Now, as we all know, whether it's market-driven or even the assessed value of your home, if you live in a single-family home, we're not talking impacts on a $300,000 house. So, many of you who, or that live in maybe a $400,000 to $500,000 assessed value home, these numbers are going to be quite a bit higher.
Yeah.
That's one. But more importantly, the second part is there are, let's say half or a significant number of people in town who are going to be struggling with these numbers. If they're in a condominium complex or on fixed incomes or things like that, doubling or tripling your project obligations, and I guess really what it comes down to is us balancing as a committee that doubling or tripling, which is a big number in our head, but in the grand scheme of things with the overall taxes that we pay, maybe it's not. And so I just, again, wanted to make sure that we have all of the information at hand as a committee as we're moving forward and we're dealing with all of these projects. Nancy?
Yeah, I was wondering, is there any update on the ARPA funds?
So we'll be receiving $1.6 million in ARPA money, and Melissa Roy, who's behind me, our assistant town manager, HR director, has been working with me on making the computation about lost revenue. There's a lost revenue component of it, which is a year-over-year loss. If you can show that, then you can use ARPA funds for general government services. So we're working that out. We think we have it figured out, but we don't have a total update as of yet on it.
And the lost funds isn't 2020, our COVID year, it's the year before?
The base year is 2019 on it.
Yes, okay.
And so they're comparing those years. And like I said, so we may have some ARPA funds that are available to use. And there are certain things that we already can use ARPA funds for. Two of the projects I put in the budget narrative are two of those kinds of projects that deal with non-point source pollution. So we could use ARPA funds to fund those.
Thank you.
So does anyone have a, sort of kick things off, does anybody have an opinion about how these numbers are? Are they what we were expecting to add to the quality of life in the community? Are they a little bit more than we sort of thought, from bouncing back and forth to all the individual sheets? Are there any opinions one way or the other?
I guess my question would be, since this is the first exercise in this, do we have anything to compare it to I don't know how to ask this question. How different is this compared to past years?
Yeah.
It's a good question for Russ. In that you've been dealing this for years and years, and you see that flow out over 5, 6, 7 years. So how have you approached it? Does this look different? Does this landscape look different over the next 5 years than it's looked in the past?
I think
going from one number to almost doubling sort of thing.
I think when you're talking about a $12 million potential facility, and I don't want to even put a number on it because I think we need to go through that process. But when you look at something like that, that's order of magnitude more significant than what we've had in the past. So that's a little bit of reflection on, we've had a $4.5 million library project go through, but we haven't had any other facility upgrade go through. So that's something that
Short of Public Works, right?
we need to look at in terms of the schematic going forward. Obviously, take a pretty serious look at that. No, I think strategically, this sheet is built on assumptions, and it's like anything else. You build something on assumptions, and you look at it. One of the things that we've done in this year's budget, and actually I want to pass along some good news because our health insurance rating came back at 1.6%.
Great.
So that actually had the net effect, and the dental insurance was a 1.5% decrease. So that has had a net effect on our budget to bring it down to 2.48% growth from 2021. And so that will, I think, serve us well in the budget process going forward. But if, again, I refer people back to the narrative that I put together, and I think what we tried to do for 2022 is, since our fund balance is a little healthier than normal, we recommended funding half of the warrant articles from the fund balance, and then the other half we would put on the warrant as we normally would. Well, we'd put all the warrant articles on the warrant, but half of them would be recommended to be funded from surplus or fund balance. So those are one-time capital expenses, and I think that's another important thing to know, is that they replace one-time capital. So, from year to year, we can drop that number as we need to accommodate maybe some other things. So over the years, I've had a consistent method of looking at the budget in terms of three different buckets. There's one for debt service, there's one for lease purchases, and there's one for non-debt service capital. But I think those non-debt service capital questions are always answered during the budget process. How much can the town afford to take on in a given year? And I think we've tried to really vet that at the committee level, and from what I see, that's still being vetted very well by the group. So those are just some thoughts I have on it.
Just as a quick answer to that, if you look at in 2020, we were at 945. And then, to Liz's point about, all right, well, if we didn't do anything, what would our obligations look like? And it's fairly flat, if not going down, a little bit over the course of 5 years. And you can see that there's no real spikes either. So Russ is exactly correct. Obviously, over the last several years, we don't show earlier, but I went back and did that research myself, and it's always been in that 900 or so, 800, low 800s. Sometimes it goes over 1,000 a little bit, but not much. It's fairly steady. So Russ is exactly correct. It's been fairly consistent over the years. The X factor for us is that 3 years or so from now, we've got the potential for 2 to 3 very large non-public works projects to consider, and that is going to throws everything out of whack. So that's why we're really here on the 13th of October versus waiting till November, is those projects that are going to be coming out in a few years. So, Judy.
When do we benefit from the TPT? When does that kick in to contribute to lowering the tax rate?
What's TPT? What's that?
Maybe that's the
ARPA?
wrong-
ARPA?
ARPA?
No. Out on commercial.
Oh, the TIF?
Yes.
okay.
TIF.
Oh, the tip.
I don't know what TPT is.
Yeah.
We got there.
Yeah, we got
we got there.
Toilet paper totals.
You need teamwork.
Yeah, work
What was
together.
that?
I said toilet paper totals, TPT. First thing in my head. Scary.
So you probably know the most about the
Yeah, good
TIF
point, good
district.
point,
I
Judy.
don't know all the financial machinations of that.
Yeah, so the Epping Road TIF has continued to be very successful. Ray Farm has brought a lot of value to the table, and I don't have an exact time window when we might be able to pay off the bond. We've borrowed $4.7 million against the $7.9 million bonding authority for the TIF. and we've made 3 payments so far on that. So we're paying it down, but we want to, the timing of the question is good because we need to set our new tax rate shortly, and that TIF has increased it's up to 71.8 million in total value. So it's been very, very successful, and I suspect when we tax this go-round of the TIF, we'll actually have enough money in the fund to pay off 2 years of the bond. Wow. So that should be coming in.
So you control how much you want to put in or pay off in a given year? Or is that not accurate?
Yeah, that's just more of a debt payment scenario that we'd set up with the bond bank who holds the bond.
Right.
So that's how we would do it. We'd go back to them and say, we'd like to pay this portion early if possible, and just pay it off, just like a bill.
So to follow on Judy's excellent question, the implication is that at some point when that bond is paid off, our revenue stream will improve in terms of taxable income based on that, yes?
So what will happen is that when the TIF sunsets, the total value of the TIF will go back to the general fund to be part of the overall town assessed valuation, which has a net positive impact on the tax rate. By lowering it.
So right now, the taxes that are generated from the original value of the land come to us. It's the added value that has not been realized in yet, is that right?
The incremental value is what we tax separately and bring that into the TIF fund to pay off the bond.
Yeah, so for, just a kind of reminder for anyone who doesn't do this a lot, so you had they had that area that they mapped out, and they froze the value and said, whatever that value is, that's always going to go into your general fund, and then they made your improvements in that next layer, that layer of additional tax revenue from those improvements, that's what goes into paying the bond. So.
And when the bond is done, that additional layer comes into our taxable value of the town, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Sure.
So, Russ, is there an option, instead of paying, for 2 years, can you take 1 year and put it in the general fund? Or are you obligated to leave that money always for that bond?
Because of the way the TIF was set up, and you can't do it any other way, you have to leave that money and obligate it toward the TIF. Okay. It doesn't have to be for the bond, it can be for improvements within the TIF district, but it has to be left separate.
And do the improvements to the TIF district have to have been laid out by the TIF itself, or is it something you can add to? Because I know there's, whatever you're doing in the TIF was laid out originally, so I just wondered.
Right, so the TIF plan had 2 iterations to it. The first one laid out the basics of it and what was to be done in the TIF district. The second one added the light at Continental Drive and Epping Road. So it's been through two town meetings now of amending the TIF financing plan, and that's how it works.
Okay, just wondering.
You can amend a TIF, but it's not willy-nilly.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to jump in because nobody sees my hand come up. And I think this is, I know that we don't have like we're not going to talk about anything specific tonight as far as warrant articles. No, I haven't had dinner, so I don't want to get weeds. I'm just kidding. But no, my point is I'd really like to, over the years, and from my very first year, the first year really kind of like hit me in the face, is like, because we would get so into the weeds of little bitty things that really didn't, it's important to make sure that we're being, paying attention to all the dollars, but at the same time, I felt like we were paying too much attention to very small dollars and not enough attention to the big dollars. So I would really like to keep that in mind, and I know it's a hard habit to break, but I'd like to try and break the habit of spending a lot of time on very small things, very small administrative items. It is what it is. If there's no major questions, can we move on to free up time to talk about these warrant articles that we're talking about millions of dollars here, and to really vet those out and have real quality discussions, and so that our time is invested wisely.
I also should probably point out that some of the assumptions in this sheet, and my basic message is that things change. regulations change for water and sewer in particular. We're seeing many more changes on the water side with PFAS and PFOA, and now lead is obviously a big issue, has been, but it's becoming more and more of an issue. And the other thing about some of the assumptions are, when we developed the CIP, we were also talking about, the recreation area and what would happen with that, and now we have an opportunity in front of us to purchase a piece of property that with the building can move our department over there for 1.15 million, 1.25 if you include the renovation money or the repairs money. So that's going to change the dynamics of the recreation CIP considerably, which will come back and change the dynamics here as well. So just to point that out.
Todd?
Thank you. Your original question was, do I have any opinions? And the answer is, yeah, I do, but I'm not going to give. But I'm not going to give them to you right now. But I have, but I do have a couple of sort of basic accounting questions, probably for Russ, that have some bearing on what we talked about so far. And I think I know the answer, but the one is this: relative to bonding. When you're looking at like some really super expensive projects that inevitably we're going to have to tackle at some point. Is there a way to stretch that bonding out commensurate with the size of the project? Because so as to make it less painful, so to amortize it over a longer period of time than we normally do. So in other words, $5 million library over X number of years. Can we do a $10 million public safety over 2X years, if you will? So that's one question. And then another clarification is you talked about, so this is the accounting question also. You talked about designating, what do you call it, fund of balance, extra balance of funds or fund of balance? I'm not so up on my terminology on that. And designating that money to some of the projects that are now in the CIP and funding them that way. I think I represent that correctly. Mm-hmm. How do you square that with qualifying for ARPA? Are the two in any way related or not? It seems like if we have excess money, then we have a problem with ARPA, don't we?
So on the first question, can we stretch out a bond further than a certain amount of years? Yes, we can do that. It's actually one of the conversations that we have all the time internally with finance, and I'd point out the library bond, we went to 15 years. Originally, we had talked about 10, and so we did, that's an example of one we did stretch out to 15, and part of that was because we got a fantastic interest rate of 1.37% on a 15-year bond. Right. So that allowed us to, that flexibility, I think, to make me not sweat the interest payments as bad as I normally do. So it was, but to the second question, is fund balance related to ARPA? No, not at all. They're completely separate.
Okay, thank you.
So what's your typical year? I like that. I mean, because I look at, we mortgage our house for 30 years.
Yeah.
Is it typically 10 or is it?
In the way we've been doing financial planning, it's related back to the amount of the bond. Mm-hmm. So we tend to look at $1 million over 10 years, mm-hmm. and we tend to look at $4.5 million over 15 if we can. Mm-hmm. And then for $53 million, which is a wastewater facility, we went 20. And industry standards say you really shouldn't go more than 20 if you can help it. That's something like the MWRA likes to do with large-scale projects. And I think, if it was hundreds of millions of dollars, I might be saying something different. But we like to keep to 20 as much as we can.
Those are good numbers to know.
It's like funding a car over 7 years.
Yeah.
If you have to stretch it to 7 years to afford it, then don't buy the car.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's a good number to know relative to the sewage treatment plan, for example. Yeah.
Right, I think it's interesting.
And interest rates in the past few years have been, they've been rock bottom. So even for us, we still have a 20-year bond on the books. If you remember the Epping Road water tank, when that went up, that's a 20-year bond at 3.97%, and it's been refunded 2 different times to lower our payment. And so we're continuing to work with the bond bank on that. If they give us an opportunity to refinance it, we say yes.
Right. And then that is a very good question, because if you look at the proposed, general fund projects, 25% of the potential debt service of projects, that haven't been approved yet. But, 4 or 5 years from now, 25% each are the public safety complex, the debt associated potentially with that. Again, we put in a number of 12 million. It could be 10, it could be 13.2. I mean, we'll suss that out. But, I wanted to just sort of get a rough idea of what we were looking at, and without, hopefully it's not 20, and we all know it's not going to be 8. So, this would seem like a good middle number to put. But the point is that if, to Russ's point, if the interest rates continue in our favor and we maybe stretch it out to 15 years for a 12 or so $12 million facility, all of a sudden, then our obligations are maybe $50 to $75 less just for that one project.
Yeah.
Same thing with, if the rec, because of this opportunity on Hampton Road, if this stretches out the proposal, or what was in the CIP now, if it stretches that out to 8 to 10 years, as opposed to 5, then all of a sudden these numbers look, not as bad.
Right, and not to minimize that, but I would also say that these numbers are today dollars. And so, yes, it's going to be 572 more 5 years from now, but that's in today dollars, not into 20, I'm stating the obvious because I'm so good at that. That's not into 2027
I didn't have enough
dollars, if
time.
you will, right? So
They're discounted.
So the other number, so relatively speaking, it will be less. I don't want to minimize it.
I was going to make this so it folded out, so there'd be a present value on it.
Yeah.
This is a good exercise in seeing the whole picture.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great.
Yeah, we can look at it, you sort of digest it, then maybe tuck it away, pull it out again in November, and then over time, we can sort of update it. One of the things that Corey and I thought is that this would be a tool for us going forward, was when the facilities committee and their consultant, starts sussing out the public safety complex, and we get the chiefs weigh in on that, we can sort of reconfigure this and see, all right, it's looking all right. The water and sewer regulations have not been as bad as we thought, and we can re-massage this.
That to me is the greatest value for this group is, so many times in past years you sit there and you vote on CIP items, but from where? From how are we coming up with whether that's affordable to us or not, other than saying, well, Russ will figure out how it's affordable, right? So to be able to see how it visions and be able to make decisions about, well, can we do that? Is it necessary? Is it not necessary? We have lots of necessary things. And like Bob said, use it as a tool, tweak numbers from year to year, so we get a real sense of what we're voting on when we do. So I like it for that reason.
You cool?
Yeah, you're good. Go for it.
You asked for opinions earlier on.
I would love to have some opinions.
Since it's 7:20, I just wanted to kind of throw something out there. And so we'll see how this goes. Hang in there. I look at the green bars and notwithstanding the potentially very expensive items coming down the road, public safety, DPW, I'm not and that's not even factoring in, let's say, extending bonds, as I just alluded to. I'm actually not that shocked at the moment. Someone can convince me otherwise, but I'm just like, it's potential, it's doable. And here comes maybe the other part of it. I look at water and sewer. I worry about the expensive infrastructure relative to water and sewer, because, and we all do. But at the end of the day, water and sewer are utilities. And I sort of reflect, and I sort of reflect on the fact that it's kind of interesting that we, as a budget recommendation committee, of course, are obliged to chop on water and sewer. That's part of what we do. And so it's great that it's in this spreadsheet, because, we all have to ultimately pay that as ratepayers. But I do think of them as utilities. And so what are we going to pay for cable TV 5 years from now? And do we get to chop on that? No, we don't. And electricity rates and things of that sort. I know it sounds a little callous because it's all, at the end of the day, money out of people's pockets, but it's interesting that we're sort of forced into sort of adding those numbers into our deliberations. So I sort of think of them separately in that regard. So while I worry about the expensive, the needed upgrades to our, and probably required upgrades to water and sewer, I put them in different buckets in my brain, I guess is what I'm going to say.
I feel like at the end of the day, though, it comes down to a number that you and I are responsible for. So
as a
while
committee,
they are separate, and some people don't have the blue and the yellow bars, so to speak, it is all dollars at the end of the day. And it may, if you have heavy infrastructure coming down, like a surface water plant that isn't even represented here, like, does that inform what you do on the green side?
So I'm maybe not articulating myself well, but for example, and I don't know the answer to this, it's dangerous, I think, to throw a question out when you don't know the answer, but in the town of Hampton, it's my understanding the water is a private company, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
So in Hampton, I'm guessing the BRC equivalent in Hampton is not chopping on the water budget, because it's a private company. Am I correct about that?
That's right, they wouldn't have
so in Hampton,
control over it.
If you need if Hampton's private, I'm just, again, I'm stating the obvious. If the Hampton Water Company, whatever it's called, decides to put in a $10 million well, is the BRC in Hampton wringing its hands about that? No. I'm going to guess the answer is no. The well would be done and the cost would be passed on to the customers, right? So I just want to sort of articulate that and say,
I would disagree with you. I would disagree with you.
Okay, well, so maybe I'll need to be educated on that.
They don't have anything, they can't do anything about it, but what that cost will do will impact the other things that they can do, potentially. So
the taxpayer.
The ratepayers.
The ratepayers and the taxpayers.
Right. So
I don't deny that one bit.
They can't vote on it, like we can make recommendations to the select board, we work with Russ and finance to massage the numbers, and then the select board goes to the voters.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have the blue bar there.
Right.
But if those numbers went up precipitously, that would impact, potentially, this committee's, interest in maybe buying a new fire truck, for instance, because we just added, a $10 million well. So he says, that's a lot to pile on the public at this point.
Yeah.
Let's wait a while. So it would impact your decision-making. You wouldn't have anything to do with it, but it would impact your decision-making because it's real money that you have to be aware of.
Yeah, and you understand. I'm fully sensitive to the fact that it's real money to real citizens. Don't get me wrong.
I understand.
But I'm just pushing back just a little bit, well, maybe even more than a little bit, by making the distinction between things such as general government, general fund, and utilities, and the fact that although it is all real money at the end of the day and coming out of the pockets of the ratepayers and the taxpayers, there are other utilities out there as well that we have no say over, and in other towns maybe that wouldn't have any, where in towns where people have wells and septic systems, incredibly expensive as well, or equally expensive. So I just want to sort of keep that in mind in not letting us get hemmed in by those things excessively.
Just something that you got me thinking along some of those lines, and thank you. A couple of points. One is, are we considering suggesting that the planning that has been done, the leased vehicles and the vehicles buying and things gets reevaluated and stretched out? I mean, I also don't underestimate the voters, right? I mean, we vet things to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, but ultimately, we're a recommendations committee, and it ultimately, yeah, it goes to the select board, they can make, but they're elected officials. We are too, but it's different, in my opinion.
You're right.
And I think ultimately, it's up to the voters. So,
However,
and we have
ask
quite a
us-
process.
They ask us to take a first cut at it and to present them with something that, to do their analysis, so that every voter out there doesn't have to sit there and pour through everything and then make an
Okay.
assessment. They rely on us
Okay.
to make that first cut. You're right, it ultimately
do
comes
that,
to the
though.
voters.
But I'm not, at what point, where's our stop point? Where do we stop and say, okay, we've dotted the i's, we've crossed the t's, and at what point do we, I don't know.
I think that's for every
that
one of us
option.
That's
to
where-
answer individually. Like my evaluation
Yeah,
point.
I'm not comfortable with taking that over for the
So my
voters.
evaluation point will go to the point of saying, well, what does this look like 5 years from now? Maybe Bob's, it doesn't. Maybe he says, this is a great project. I don't really care what it does 5 years from now. It's a good project, let the voters decide. So you may have a different way of evaluating a project than Bob or myself.
Well, that's obvious, right? There's a lot of people in this
We'll
room.
see where it comes to. I mean,
I meant as a
you answer the question
committee.
for yourself, I think.
I can do that for myself in my voting with my vote, right?
Right, exactly.
But what I'm saying is, as a committee, where is our stop point? We're not making those decisions that an individual voter, what I'm trying to say is, that's for them to make when they pick up their ballot at our voting place, at our polling place, right? My understanding of being on this committee for several years, one way or another, is vetting things and then letting the voters have at it, so.
Excuse me, Judy?
I have a different issue. Sometimes I hear people asking, well, who's going to be able to afford to live in Exeter in 5 years from now or down the road if taxes continue going up? Kathy knows house values continue going up, and so the taxes with them. I understand there's some point that Rye has found where house values go up so high that the tax rate can be reduced. But I keep in mind that a lot of the people in the subcommittee area that I work in can't afford to live in town. And it would be nice if we could keep the tax rate, or at least the town's portion of it, at a rate that would allow us to continue to have a fairly broad base of income levels who can afford to live in town. But I'm not sure from our 30,000-foot view here how we impact that level of taxation that
We might not, and to Nancy's point, we all may have different ideas about how we do that. All we wanted to do is to get the information in front of you, so that you can see that, right now, we're paying around $1,100, and that's going to more than double in 5 years. We can do with what we want with that information. We can just say, that's fine, we'll continue on and let the voters decide. That's more than fine. We just wanted to get the information out there, because they're pretty dramatic numbers. As Russ said early on, we're considering 2, potentially 3, very large general fund projects in the next few years, which is somewhat unprecedented in this town. In the past, we had 2, and one of them went by the wayside because they were 2 at the same time. So typically, we've been able to line those up. That's not happening in the next few years. So it's just to get the information.
And Bob, would you agree that based on some of those studies related to water and sewer, there's some pretty important but also pretty expensive water-related projects that are not even really factored into this spreadsheet that you've put out for us, correct?
Important is, I guess, in the eye of the beholder.
Okay.
I mean, the worry we all have, and Russ and I'm on the Water and Sewer Committee, so I talked to Russ a lot about this, is we just don't know.
No.
You know, the PFOAs thing, blew up and everybody was crazy. We funded like $300,000 worth of testing a few years ago, and I think it's still out there, but it's, the furor has died down. And, things just keep popping up.
The water sources, for example.
Every year. So we just don't know. And like I said, just wanted to get the information out.
No, I get it, but to follow on that, sorry, Anna, but isn't it also likely that, I mean, there's an active consideration for additional water sources, and if that comes to pass, that's expensive?
Part of the analysis.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Bill, I just want to clear through the committee questions first. I will get to you.
Well, I just want to know whether I was told to come here tonight, and I don't mean to interrupt your discussion, but I was told to come to present for the conservation warrant article.
No, this isn't a CIP analysis night. It's just a conversation with the committee. Sorry we wasted an hour of your time. Hopefully it was illuminating.
Earlier, I guess. I was just told to come, so.
Wow.
Sorry.
Giving your mark.
I'm sorry.
This is Bill.
No, we'll be doing that on November,
Friday, the 22nd.
Nancy and her committee will be, sort of.
All day, Friday. I think it's the 22nd, a few weeks, 2 weeks from tomorrow. Or, yeah, sorry, 2 weeks from this Friday.
Some communication broke down.
Not a problem, Bill. Sorry to waste your time.
So can I just finish one more thought?
Oh, yeah.
Liz was gonna.
Okay, let Liz.
Well, Liz can
No,
have it.
all I wanted to say, Liz, was that I appreciate the exercise. I want to make sure that's clear. I think this exercise is really good. I think when we save CIP for the end of a budget process, we're all burnt out, and it doesn't get the look it needs. And I also think that, from me, my perspective, part of our responsibility sitting on this recommendation committee is to vet and inform the public. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
So I think both of you had something, right?
No, I was just trying to get you to see her.
Oh, okay.
That's all.
Yeah, I did see her.
Waving the flag.
I was going to do the wave, but she wouldn't do it.
Sorry, Liz.
I have no questions but obvious comments, because I'm going to say obvious things too. I really like this exercise, not just because I love Excel spreadsheets, which I do, but because instead of flipping back and forth, when I'm looking at these numbers, when I'm looking at the 5-year scope, it becomes obvious that stacking major projects all at once is going to have potentially a significant impact. And it makes me wonder, or makes me concerned about the lack of staggering of major projects up until now. And how can we, this is me in like a 50,000, however many feet up in the air you want me to go, but this is beyond just the projects we're funding and so forth, but like long-term planning in general, and making sure that we don't get to the point where, well, right now it's $1,100, but 3 years from now, it's gonna jump up because we have to do some major projects. Maybe not all three, whatever it might be. But there has to be that long-term forecasting in a way that also includes educating voters on what this means as an investment in our town overall. The other thing that I want to say that I'm very concerned about, because you asked for opinions, it's time to clarify, is that we have these things that involve designing projects, which I think we do in this town, and then things don't go through afterwards. And so I'm also concerned about the amount that we end up using for design and then they don't pass. And so all of the things I just said are very obvious and we all already knew, but you asked me to look at this spreadsheet and share my thoughts, and those are the things that are on my mind, is sort of the 2 points of we have to stagger projects that have these long-term infrastructure positive value, whatever you want to say. And also, how do we go from funding designs for major projects and then making sure, or setting them up for success, to then moving them forward so that they can actually happen too. I know that's beyond I know it's beyond our committee.
Well, it's not, actually. It's not, because we have actually started a different way of doing these projects, learning from the water treatment plant a number of years ago and the rec project a couple of years ago, is that both the public safety complex and the public works garage planning into design processes have been the brakes have been pumped on those. So instead of $250,000 asks, like there were a couple of years ago for each of those, it's now more in the order of $50,000 to do, to really boil down with, Jennifer and the two chiefs on what they want, really, and get a rough idea of the cost, as opposed to just throwing a bunch of money at a consultant. So, Kathy.
Yeah, I like that, the stacking thing, and I think it puts limitations, which are good limitations, because it's designing a project with a budget and keeping within that budget, because we have more of a clearer picture as a committee, and thus so do the select board, so that we say, you know what, I like your scope of your project, but you really have to step it back, because we put in 5 million and we don't want to see 12. Because we've seen that before. And so I think what we've now have established is this thing, and I'll go back, because I wasn't here at the beginning, and I'm sorry if you had mentioned that $300,000 house and how that affects those people. Now, keeping in mind, I look at the $300,000 house, and I can tell you, I don't know if you know anyone that lives in Pine Meadow, okay? Pine Meadow now, their houses they're assessed at like 300 or more.
Really?
Okay, because I will tell you, because if a whole bunch of them sell in 1 year, okay, then the tax assessor has a great, they can say, oh, good, I can use that as my, I can change them all now, because they're all comparable, right? Where if an old house sells here and an old house sells here, you can't take all those old houses and say, oh, they're all up here. As we know, there's many houses that sell for $1 million, and look at their assessed value. You'll be surprised. But I can take a road that has very similar houses and assess them all fairly high, in my opinion, when you look at other things. Right. But I understand how the system works. But so when I look at that, and I look at my friends that live over there, and I say, oh my God, this would be really hard for them. These increases would be really hard for them. So I think when you think about a $300,000 house, you'd be really surprised what is assessed at $300,000. And so you kind of have to look at it. And I don't, it is what it is, as they say. I think you said that. My mother, it's her new favorite saying. Mm-hmm. But it is really, it really is, it's hard, but I mean, it's something that
well, I have to say that what both of you just said, but Liz, what you just said about the design costs is probably the nexus point as to why you and I did this last fall, because it just rankled us that we spent $250,000, and I'm not arguing about the money, but the way it morphed into a project that we weren't able to see how it fit into the grand plan. So this hopefully as a tool will allow us to go slower, first of all, stretch some of the analysis or the planning phases out a few years, so we can really get a hard idea of what the project should cost. A lot of times we'll hire a consultant, consultants consult, surgeons cut and consultants, so they give you what they want you to, what they think that you should buy, and then the project gets a little bit out of hand. And that's what happened with the wastewater treatment plant. It was a $60 million plant, and through some value engineering, we were able to bring it down closer to 50. That is what we need to take a look at, is let's draw that line in the sand on the budget and not just let out-of-town people tell us what they think we should have, we should be driving the bus and tell them, this is what we can afford, make this within the budget. So a very good point, very good point.
The other piece of this is, this is the projected cost of these projects, but what's not reflected on here, and I don't know that it could be, is how long these projects would last for us. What would a DPW garage, how long are we talking about?
Yeah.
That investment now, and how long would we then have that? I think that is such a critical part of this entire conversation, is that, with the bond or all these technical terms that a regular person may not feel comfortable engaging with, but how long are we going to have our new DPW garage if we pass it? Like, what is that investment long-term going to be for us? And I think that is also, needs to be part of the conversation as well.
Yeah.
Well, they're all 50 years, and they probably more. The public safety complex was built in 79. Mm-hmm. And, does it still work? Yes. Is it cramped and there are issues as the town's grown? Yes. We need to look at that. Public Works garage was built in 68?
69.
69. So, so that's 50 years old. Does it need work? Yes, absolutely. Is it unsafe structurally and from an air quality perspective? Absolutely. We need to fix it somehow. Is it $10 million? Probably not. Is it, should we put some money into it? Yes, we should. And we need to figure out how to do that. The stacking is a concern. Mm-hmm. It is a concern. And, Russ has done, I've been working with him for, 14 years now? 15 years. 15 years. And fortuitously, 16 now. I was rounding up.
He's counting.
Fortuitously, we've generally only had one big project that we've had to deal with, and usually like once every 3 or 4 years. Now we've got, we had the library rec thing, butt up against each other, and that was sort of the beginning. And now we've got 3 projects, or at least 2.5, depending on how the rec thing goes. That can be stretched out probably. But we still have 2 very major facilities that are coming up against each other that are both very critical to the quality of life in this town. So they both need to be looked at, and I think it's up to us to take that first cut. Whether we do anything about it, who knows? But we need to take that first cut, and then, like I said, just this is the information.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So Bob, I will pass around because I figured that issue may come up. I've actually been keeping track of our CIP projects over the years.
Nice.
And people are able to, at your own leisure, look through this list, but I mean, we get into these conversations and people talk about what was before they talk about where we go, and so, which is understandable. But these are projects that we've done over the years that have actually been, and some of them are large-scale projects. And we've accomplished, I think we've accomplished a lot. There's more to come. But I think this will give you a good idea when you look at when you look at the basics of the planning that we've done, which has brought us to this point.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I mean, there's no question that we've had some big, the dam was a big deal. Not $12 million, but it was a big deal. It was well into the millions of dollars. And it had a sentimental part of a lot of people's psyche, and that was part of the discussion. This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're
fantastic. And I, on a positive note, I also feel really good about a 23-year resident now, so I feel really good about what has been accomplished in recent years. I really do. And I also have confidence in the process, what we have done and what we do, and what the select board does, and what the town votes on and votes, down. I mean, it somehow magically does seem to work, strangely.
So next Friday, we have the all-day session with Nancy and Anna and Liz. Are you on that committee too? No.
Anna.
Yeah.
She might.
Just Nancy and Anna.
Just Anna and I, yeah.
presenting general government. And
I'm here.
I said your name.
No, yes, you did.
I said your name. And so as we did, I think last year, and well, 2 years last year was sort of a, who knows what happened last year. The year before we started
Last year was
the process.
all the Zoom.
It was all Zoom, right. So we didn't really get that body language and the real quality interactive discussion. So I'm glad to be back together. But 2 years ago, we started a process where the subcommittees brought forward what was in the CIP for that department or that group of departments. Just as and these are what we are considering, so that people can sort of see what's coming down the pike. And if you have any strong feelings one way or the other, you can have them in your report, but we'll be discussing them on November 18th in detail. But we are going to make sure that you bring forward CIP items in your report, just so that we can see what's coming. So you're all set, I'm assuming?
So are you going to have on the 18th, the department narratives? I mean, are you going to have people?
We'll have
are you going to have the department heads here too?
So, yeah.
Do you have 2 nights for that? I mean,
I'm hoping not.
Because
That's why I'm doing
I've
this
done
now.
planning board for years where we had the CIP and it took, at least,
Right.
it was very long. It was sometimes 2 nights.
I think this year is not going to be bad. And between now and then, there's some consideration on what
discussion.
warrant articles actually get presented forward or which ones get paid for out of the fund balance. So there'll be some things maybe that we don't even have to discuss in several weeks.
Okay.
Well, or discuss them shortly. But yeah, hopefully we can do it in one night. It'll be a long night, but like I said, I wanted to sort of set the tone here in an hour and a half, I think.
Okay.
Wasn't too much out of people's day.
We do have 2 nights set aside.
Right, 2 nights available.
Okay, I just wondered.
If needed.
Last couple of years, we've done it in one. So.
I really enjoyed that one at the fire station that one time.
Oh my gosh, that
One
was
of the
at
worst
midnight.
meetings ever.
I remember Harry walked Julie and I out to our car because it was midnight. He didn't want us walking alone.
So,
I'm not staying at any meeting till midnight, so.
if you have any questions on the details of this, certainly feel free to continue to weigh in, but otherwise, again, it's information to sort of ruminate on for a month from now. We'll see you all next Friday.
Thank you.
All right, Judy.
Great exercise.
Schedule meeting adjourned 11 minutes early.
All right.
Duly noted. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for tuning in to Exeter TV. Exeter TV is the town's public and government access channels, available on Comcast channels 98 and 22. Channel 98 is your channel. If you have an idea for a program, want to host your own talk show, or submit a film, we're here to get your content on television. On Channel 22, we bring you live and replay coverage of government meetings and other town updates. A third channel, Blue Hawk Media, is operated by SAU 16 and can be found on Channel 13, with all your school sports, events, and meetings. You can watch Exeter TV online at exeternh.tv, Apple TV, and on Roku. Find us on social media for extra content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell to get notified about live streams and new content. Tune in to our platforms every other Friday to watch the Exeter Biweekly Report, with recaps of recent events, updates from town departments, and messages from nonprofits in your area. If you head to our website, exeternh.tv, we invite you to sign up to our newsletter to receive monthly updates about new content, upcoming meetings, and more. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch Exeter TV and hope that you tune in to our other content as well.